My heels strike the marble floor of the Portland courthouse, each step a thunderclap in the frozen silence. I feel eyes drilling into my back, whispers slithering through the gallery as I walk the longest 50 feet of my life. Reporters lean forward in their seats, notepads poised like weapons. The Langford name scandal unfolds in real time, and I'm center stage whether I want to be or not. I don't turn when I hear my mother's laugh, quiet, cutting, and deliberately timed for maximum humiliation. It's a sound I know too well, the elegant knife she's wielded my entire life. From the corner of my eye, I catch my father shaking his head, disappointment radiating from him in familiar waves. For 32 years, I've been Beatrice Langford, the daughter who could never quite measure up. Today that changes. Today, for the first time, I'm not the one on trial. They are. I take my seat beside federal prosecutor Sandra Miller, arranging my navy blazer with hands I refuse to let tremble. Sandra gives me a subtle nod, one professional to another. The weight of the evidence we've gathered presses against us like a physical presence. "You ready?" she whispers. Am I ready to dismantle the empire my family built? The Langford name means something in Portland 12 rental developments sprawling across the city, 3 lakefront properties glistening on the water's edge, over $8 million in real estate holdings. My father built that empire brick by brick over 40 years. Graham Langford, the man whose approval I chased like a shadow that always stretched just beyond my reach. Behind us sits my mother, Portland's beloved socialite. Diane Langford, queen of charity galas and symphony fundraisers, whose grace and philanthropy mask something far colder. She crosses her legs at the ankle, pearl necklace catching the fluorescent lights, perfect posture, perfect smile, perfectly cruel. And Ethan, my brother, lounges 2 rows back, scrolling through his phone as if this is all a minor inconvenience. 35 years old and still the golden son who could do no wrong. He doesn't even look up when I enter. His dismissal as complete as it was when we were children. My mind flashes back to 2016, the housing downturn that nearly broke us. I remember my father's face, gray with stress as the numbers bled red month after month. I remember stepping in when his health failed, working 18-hour days to keep Langford Holdings from collapse. I remember withdrawing $520,000 of my personal savings money I'd set aside for my own future and pouring it into the family business like water on dying plants. No contracts, no guarantees. Just faith in my family and the company that bore our name. 3 months later, when the market corrected and profits returned, I sat at our mahogany dining table watching my mother cut into her steak. The knife sliced through with surgical precision, her movements delicate and refined. The board has concerns, my father said, not meeting my eyes. About certain financial manipulations. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Financial manipulations? You mean the money that saved the company? The manner in which it was done? My mother interjected, dabbing her lips with a napkin. It shows a certain overreach. I looked between them, waiting for the punchline that never came. I'm being dismissed? After everything I've done? Mother set down her knife, eyes cold as winter glass. You were born to follow, not to lead, Beatrice. Some of us simply must accept our place. The words carved into me deeper than any blade. I left that night with nothing but a folder of balance sheets tucked under my arm, proof of my contribution and my dismissal. The silence as I walked out the door was deafening, my identity stripped away with a few careful words. Now, sitting in this courthouse, I meet Sandra's gaze and find something I haven't felt in years. Respect. Yes, I tell her, voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. I'm ready. The courtroom falls silent as Judge Alan McKinney enters. His face gives nothing away as he calls the court to order, neutral eyes surveying the room. I wonder if he can feel at the weight of what's about to happen, years of manipulation laid bare for all to see. I can feel my father's eyes on my back, that familiar weight of disappointment that once threatened to crush me. I remember how he'd look whenever I questioned family decisions. That slow blink that dismissed me more effectively than words ever could. From the corner of my eye, I see my mother's subtle adjustments, straightening her already perfect posture, tilting her chin just so. The embodiment of maternal concern masking the architect of 1,000 small, undermining comments, each designed to keep me in my place. And Ethan, now finally looking up from his phone, smugness radiating from him like heat. I can picture him at the family table, lounging while the rest of us sit straight, secure in his golden child status. The pattern is so clear now. The control, the manipulation, the steady erosion of my confidence in place. For years I thought it was love, thought the problem was me, how wrong I'd been. As the judge begins speaking, a strange calm settles over me. This isn't about money anymore. It isn't about properties or companies or even inheritance. It's about truth. And for the first time in my life, the truth is on my side. I straighten my spine and face forward, ready for the reckoning that's been years in the making. 3 years after walking out of the Langford mansion, I'd created a life that was distinctly mine. My Portland loft apartment sat 5 stories above the city, its industrial windows framing Mount Hood on clear days. Simple furniture, clean lines, nothing like the ornate excess I'd grown up with. A place where I made the rules until the day a gray parcel appeared at my door. No sender, no stamp, just my name in block letters that made my stomach clench. I carried it inside, setting it on my kitchen counter like it might detonate. For 20 minutes, I circled it, making coffee I wouldn't drink, straightening things that weren't crooked. When I finally tore open the packaging, a sealed envelope slid out. For her eyes only. H. Langford, my grandfather's handwriting. Henry had been dead 6 years, but I'd recognize those blocky capital letters anywhere. They belonged to a different era when men signed their names with the weight of their word behind each stroke. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, a will. Handwritten, dated 2004, with Henry's unmistakable signature at the bottom. I, Henry Langford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all properties, holdings, and assets to my granddaughter, Beatrice Langford. I sank onto my couch, the paper shaking in my grip. This couldn't be real. The court had read grandfather's will 3 weeks after his funeral. I'd been there, watched Ethan's smirk grow as every asset transferred to him. Not a penny, not a memento for me. I pulled up the probate records on my laptop, comparing the documents side by side. The court version named Ethan exclusively, but this version, Henry's true version, left everything to me. The signatures didn't match. Close but not identical. One had been forged. Oregon's digital will registry didn't exist back then, a legal blind spot easily exploited by someone who knew the system. Someone like my father. My phone rang 3 days later, startling me from a fitful sleep filled with courtrooms and forgeries. Is this Beatrice Langford? A man's voice graveled with age. Who's asking? Caleb Warner. I worked for your grandfather's attorney. He paused. The one who vanished in 2009. My chest tightened. What do you know about that? He refused to alter Henry's will. That's why he disappeared. His voice dropped. I've been afraid to come forward, but I can't live with it anymore. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near the Willamette River. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a view of both entrances. Caleb Warner was older than I expected, mid-70s, with thinning white hair and glasses that magnified pale blue eyes. He walked with a slight limp, scanning the room before approaching. "You look like Henry," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Same eyes." Without preamble, he placed a scratched flash drive on the table between us. Your grandfather's attorney recorded everything. Insurance, he called it. That night, alone in my apartment, I plugged in the drive. A trembling voice filled my speakers. They forced me to forge the will. Graham and Diane Langford. They had copies of Henry's signatures. Pulled one from a property deed from 1998. Graham said if I didn't cooperate, I'd regret it. I'm leaving town tonight, if anything happens to me. The recording cut off. I played it 3 more times, each repetition hardening something inside me. The deed from 1998. I remembered it the Lake Oswego property purchased as an investment. The forged signature matched it perfectly. Too perfectly. My father had orchestrated everything. The mastermind who ordered the forgery. Who handled the attorney when he became a liability? My mother, using her social connections to silence questions. Their coordinated effort to erase my inheritance to erase me. And Ethan, the willing beneficiary, complicit through his silence. The next morning I drove to First Oregon Bank and rented a safety deposit box. The original will went inside, along with a notarized statement from Caleb. I made digital copies, storing them in encrypted cloud accounts on separate drives with trusted friends. I spent nights researching Oregon estate law, statute of limitations, forensic document examination. Building my case brick by meticulous brick. I'll testify, Caleb told me over coffee a week later. My reputation be damned. I reached across the table, squeezing his weathered hand. This isn't just forgery, Caleb, it's time theft. They stole years I could have spent building on Henry's legacy. The trail led me to Bend, to a nursing home where Althea Monroe, now 82, lived in a small room filled with photographs. Henry's former housekeeper answered the door in a floral house coat, her white hair pulled into a neat bun. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, gesturing me inside. Her trembling hands turned pages of a worn photo album. I was there when he signed it, right in his study. Your mother was standing behind him. She paused at a photograph that made my breath catch. Henry at his desk, the attorney beside him, my mother's figure in the corner, June 2004. I sent a scan to Caleb that night. "It's admissible," he replied immediately. "They can't suppress this." I returned to my apartment 3 days later to find the door ajar. Inside, chaos. Drawers overturned, furniture slashed, my laptop smashed beyond repair, papers scattered across the floor like snow. Among them, a single note in my grandfather's blocky handwriting. Legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. Not his words. A message from them, a warning of how far they'd go. I gathered the papers with steady hands, no longer trembling. Each piece of evidence, each threat, each lie, exposed all of it forming a clear picture, the puzzle finally taking shape. They'd stolen my inheritance, my place, my voice, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd left me alive to fight back. A week later, my phone vibrates against the coffee table, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "We need to talk about what you've been doing," he says without preamble, his voice tight with something between anger and fear. I lean back in my chair, watching Portland's skyline through my loft window. "I'm not doing anything, Ethan. I'm pursuing the truth." "Do you have any idea what this is doing to Mom?" "To Dad?" His voice cracks slightly. "People are talking, Beatrice." "Of course they are." I've noticed the sideways glances at the grocery store, the sudden cancellations from old family friends. Diane Langford's whisper campaign is operating at full throttle, subtle insinuations about my mental state, carefully crafted rumors questioning my motives. In Portland society, my mother's soft-spoken concern carries more weight than shouted accusations ever could. The Rotary Club disinvited Mom from speaking next month. Ethan continues, 30 years of charity work, and suddenly they're going in another direction. I swallow the bitter satisfaction rising in my throat. That sounds difficult for her. Dad's having people look into your finances. He thinks if you're desperate for money, I'm not desperate for anything except the truth. I cut him off, and I have nothing to hide. What I don't tell him is that Graham's business connections have already started their work. My mortgage lender called yesterday with concerns about my application from 3 years ago. The art gallery where I occasionally sell my photographs suddenly reviewed their consignment agreement. Small, coordinated pressure points designed to paint me as unstable and greedy. "Just stop this before it gets worse," Ethan pleads, a familiar note of condescension creeping back into his voice. "For everyone's sake." After hanging up, I check my email to find a message from Caleb. Someone followed him home from the grocery store yesterday. A friendly reminder that he might want to reconsider his testimony. The threat wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. I wrap my arms around myself, fighting the familiar instinct to retreat, to make peace at any cost. That's what they're counting on the Beatrice who smoothed things over, who saved the company with her $520,000, and then walked away quietly when dismissed. But that Beatrice is gone. I arranged a meeting with Sandra Miller the next morning, bringing every document I've gathered so far. The federal prosecutor's office feels like a fortress compared to my vulnerable apartment. "This isn't just probate fraud," Sandra says, studying Henry's original will through reading glasses. "If your father threatened your grandfather's lawyer, who then disappeared, we're looking at potential federal crimes." I push a manila folder across her desk. I've cataloged everything chronologically. The will, witness statements, financial records from 2004 forward. Sandra raises an eyebrow as she flips through my meticulous timeline. "You've been busy." I worked with numbers for years. Patterns matter. I spread out a second set of documents. This is what I found in the company records. Look at the transactions after Henry died. Her finger traces the column of figures. Multiple shell companies, property transfers, all neatly structured to avoid detection. They didn't just forge grandfather's will, they systematically erased any financial connection between him and me. I tap the bottom figure, and they've been doing similar things with other properties for years. Sandra removes her glasses, fixing me with a steady gaze. "You understand what you're doing? This isn't just about inheritance anymore. You're mapping a conspiracy." My phone buzzes with a text from Ethan. "Meet us at the lodge. We just want to talk." The Langford Lodge at Crystal Lake sits deep in Deschutes County, a private retreat left over from their old resort portfolio. I drive the winding forest road alone, headlights cutting through early evening darkness. My recording app is ready on my phone, tucked into my jacket pocket. The lake glimmers under candlelight through tall windows as I park beside Ethan's Range Rover. For a moment, I sit watching the scene. It looks like a family reunion rather than an ambush. Inside, they've arranged themselves like a portrait. Diane and her pearls at one end of the table, Graham tired but defiant at the other. Ethan stands pouring wine, his smile too practiced to be genuine. "Beatrice," my mother says, rising halfway before settling again. "Thank you for coming." Graham clears his throat. "We thought it was time to clear the air." "Direct conversation is always best," I say, taking the seat across from Ethan, keeping my hands where they can reach the phone. Diane sips her wine. "This situation has gotten out of hand. We're worried about you." "Your health," Graham clarifies. "The stress of these delusions." I notice the folder beside his elbow. "What's that?" Ethan slides it across the table. "A solution? Simple, clean, final. Inside is a single document, a waiver of all claims against the Langford estate. One signature and it's over. Sign this, and it's all over," Graham says, echoing my thoughts. "We'll even establish a trust for you. Not what you imagine you deserve, but enough." I pretend to consider the document. "What exactly am I waiving here?" "Everything," Ethan says bluntly. "All claims, all rights to challenge the will. All this nonsense about forgery. She doesn't need to carry Dad's mess anymore," he continues, turning to Graham. "You already handled that lawyer, right, Dad?" The silence that follows confirms everything. My father doesn't deny it, doesn't even flinch. My mother's fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. I stand slowly, leaving the document unsigned on the table. "I'm done pretending. Beatrice." Diane's voice follows me to the door. Family loyalty still means something. I turn back one last time. "Yes, it does. That's exactly why I'm doing this." Driving away, I notice headlights among the trees, quickly extinguished. Someone watching. I check that my recording saved properly. Ethan's damning admission now preserved for Sandra. Over the next 2 weeks, my support network proves stronger than I expected. Althea Monroe, despite her failing health, agrees to sign a sworn affidavit about witnessing Henry's will signing. Caleb rejects a substantial bribe from Graham's attorney, recording the offer instead. I'm reopening the case with federal resources. Sandra tells me during our third meeting, "What you've built here is extraordinary." Together, we file a formal complaint with the Oregon Bar Association and a petition to reopen probate based on new evidence. The local business journal runs a small piece questioning Langford Holdings' financial practices. I hear Diane's charity board is holding an emergency meeting about their association with her. Graham suffers his first health episode the day after receiving legal notifications. My phone rings at midnight. Ethan, his voice raw. "What do you want?" he demands. "Just tell us. Name your price." I think about the $520,000 I gave them, about the years of manipulation, about Henry's will hidden from me. I want what grandfather intended. After hanging up, I make a decision I've avoided for years. The next morning, I drive to Mount Calvary Cemetery with white roses clutched in my hand. Henry's headstone is simple gray granite, his name and dates etched in classic font. I place the roses as I did when I was a child, arranging them just so against the cold stone. From my purse, I withdraw his letter, the paper thin from repeated folding and unfolding. I read it aloud, my voice steady in the quiet morning air. "If she stands before you, she has already carried more weight than any man in this family." For the first time since this began, tears come. Not tears of pain or anger, but something cleansing, healing. The weight of doubt lifts as I embrace the strength he always saw in me. "I won't let them erase you," I whisper to his headstone. Or me. Over the following days, Sandra methodically prepares our federal case for court. Evidence organized chronologically, witness statements notarized, Althea's deposition recorded before her health declines further. Our court date is set for 3 weeks later. I buy a new suit, practice my testimony in the mirror, build my resolve like a wall stone by stone. All the pieces are falling into place, the quiet before the storm. The night before our court date, a manila envelope appears under my apartment door. No sender, no markings. Inside is a single photograph of Henry's study at the family mansion. Something is circled in red, marker the painting behind his desk, the one of Mount Hood at sunset. I study it closer and see what I never noticed before. The slightest misalignment, the hint of something behind it. A safe, a hidden safe I never knew existed. If there's evidence still in that safe, it could be the final piece we need. But obtaining it means breaking into the family mansion impossible, dangerous, and potentially illegal. I stare at the photograph for a long moment before picking up my phone. "Sandra," I say when she answers. There's something else. The warrant for the Langford mansion arrives at dawn. a testament to Sandra Miller's efficiency. I stand on the sidewalk watching federal marshals gather, their navy jackets stark against the pale morning sky. My heart hammers against my ribs as Sandra approaches, manila folder tucked under her arm. "Ready?" she asks, echoing our courthouse exchange from weeks earlier. This time my hands don't tremble, more than ever. The family estate looms before us, its limestone facade no longer intimidating, but merely stone and mortar. The marshals fan out across the property as Sandra rings the bell. Long seconds pass before the door swings open to reveal my father, bathrobe hastily belted at his waist, sleep still clouding his eyes. The shock that transforms Graham Langford's face when he spots me is worth every sleepless night of the past 3 months. His mouth opens, closes, then opens again. The great orator suddenly speechless. "Federal warrant to search the premises," Sandra announces, extending the document. "Step aside, Mr. Langford." Behind him, my mother appears on the stairs, her silk robe perfectly arranged despite the early hour. Only the slight twitch at the corner of her eye betrays her shock. Diane Langford has spent a lifetime perfecting her composure, but even perfection cracks under enough pressure. "Beatrice," she says, voice smooth as polished stone. "What exactly do you hope to accomplish with this theater?" I meet her gaze without flinching. "The truth, Mother. Nothing more." The marshals move through the house with practiced efficiency. I lead them directly to Grandfather Henry's study, my footsteps sure despite the years since I've walked these halls. The familiar scent of leather-bound books and cedarwood hangs in the air, unchanged by time or betrayal. There, I point to the hunting scene that dominated the wall behind his desk, behind the painting. The marshal carefully removes the heavy frame, revealing the wall safe I'd only learned about 3 days ago. My father's face drains of color as he realizes what's happening. "You need a combination," he says, voice strained with false confidence. I step forward, fingers hovering over the dial. The 14th of May, 1990. My birth date, the only date Grandfather would use for something this important. The safe that holds his secrets was always meant for me to find. The lock clicks open on the first try. The family attorney arrives 20 minutes later, breathless and disheveled. His arguments bounce harmlessly off Sandra's calm recitation of the warrant's parameters. In the dining room, my father clutches at his chest, claiming heart palpitations to delay his testimony. Mother has retreated to her study, phone pressed to her ear as she calls in favors from board members, politicians, anyone with leverage over the investigation. "Your brother's on the move," Caleb reports when he calls. "Tried to visit Althea at the nursing home an hour ago." My stomach tightens. "Did they let him in?" Staff was warned. "They turned him away." Caleb pauses, his voice dropping. "They're getting desperate, Beatrice. Watch yourself." The safe yields treasures beyond my expectations. Grandfather's handwritten journal chronicles conversations about the inheritance, his careful script detailing suspicions about my father's intentions. Letters between Henry and his lawyer express growing concerns about interference in his estate planning. Photos of family gatherings bear dates, contradicting the official timeline my parents had presented to the court. But the real prize is a small USB drive tucked in the back corner. Sandra's tech specialist confirms it contains company financial records from 2004, but also before that, the year the lawyer disappeared and the records were allegedly lost in a server crash. "There's an audio file," the specialist says, connecting the drive to his laptop. The room falls silent as my grandfather's voice fills the air, steady and clear despite his age. This recording serves as verbal confirmation of my wishes. "In the event of my death, all assets and holdings of Langford Estates shall pass to my granddaughter, Beatrice Ann Langford. She alone has demonstrated the integrity and vision to carry forward what I've built." Something breaks loose inside my chest vindication after years of doubt. The next morning, the local newspaper runs a front-page article quoting sources close to the family, portraying me as unstable and vindictive. The story claims I abandoned the family business during a critical period, conveniently omitting my $520,000 contribution that saved it from collapse. "They're running the playbook," Sandra observes, scanning the article. "Character assassination, social isolation, institutional pressure. Society friends who once welcomed me now cross the street to avoid conversation. Emails circulate questioning Caleb's credibility as a witness. Political connections reach out to Sandra's superiors, suggesting the case lacks merit and wastes department resources. But the tide begins to turn when 3 former Langford Holdings employees step forward with sworn statements about my role in saving the company. The accounting firm confirms the existence of my $520,000 loan, producing documentation my parents claimed was lost. Sandra arranges a press conference with the Department of Justice, transforming what began as a private inheritance dispute into a matter of public record. Caleb's meticulous documentation reveals a pattern of legal manipulation stretching back years. At the nursing home, Althea's condition deteriorates, but her mind remains sharp. Her nurse helps record video testimony, preserving her account of the will signing for the court. She was always there, Althea says in the recording, her papery hands smoothing an imaginary tablecloth, standing behind him while he signed, making sure he did what they wanted. 2 board members resign from Langford Holdings, citing personal reasons. A bank audit flags questionable transactions in Ethan's accounts. Diane's charity organization launches an internal review after questions arise about financial discrepancies. Judge McKinney denies my parents' motion to delay proceedings, his order citing compelling evidence of potential elder abuse. The family's carefully constructed reputation unravels thread by thread. I spot them in the courthouse parking lot, mother and father, heads bent close together, voices raised in a way they would never allow in public. Father jabs a finger in mother's face, his words carrying across the asphalt. You said no one would check the signatures. Later that week, Ethan makes a scene at a downtown Portland club, drinking heavily and shouting obscenities at anyone who mentions the family name. The family attorney requests a private meeting with Sandra, sliding a settlement offer across the table that acknowledges some of my claims while protecting my parents from criminal charges. We just want to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding, he says, voice oily with false sincerity. Sandra slides the paper back without opening it. We're well past that point now. Security measures transform my apartment into a fortress, new locks, security system, cameras at all entrances. The court date moves up due to Althea's declining health, accelerating our timeline. They're desperate, Sandra warns during our final evidence review. Be careful. I nod, surprising myself with the calm certainty I feel. Grandfather always said truth has patience. The night before court, my phone rings at midnight. Caleb's voice crackles with barely contained excitement. I found something in the archive. The missing lawyer's final case notes. He recorded Graham threatening Henry directly. This connects intent to action, Beatrice. My breath catches as the implications crystallize. Send it now. The document arrives by secure courier an hour later. My hands shake as I read the lawyer's detailed account of witnessing my father threaten my grandfather over the will. The final piece that transforms our case from inheritance dispute to criminal conspiracy. They didn't just steal from me. I whisper into the empty room, shock rippling through me. They threatened him. Federal charges now loom inevitable, regardless of the probate outcome. As dawn breaks on court day, I stand before the mirror, straightening my blazer with steady hands. The woman who stares back bears little resemblance to the one who trembled in this courthouse months ago. Her eyes hold no doubt, her shoulders no burden of shame. Today, truth finally takes the stand. The courtroom brims with whispers and camera clicks, a pressure cooker of anticipation. I enter through the heavy oak doors with measured steps, so different from the uncertainty that plagued me when this all began. My navy blazer selected with purpose. This morning feels like armor against what's coming. On the opposite side, my family presents their united front. Graham, looking older than his 68 years, sits with his fingers laced together too tightly. Diane's pearls gleam under the fluorescent lights as she whispers something to Ethan. Their attorney Richards, a shark in an expensive suit, leans across the aisle as I pass. You're about to be destroyed, Ms. Langford, he murmurs, just loud enough for me to hear. I meet his gaze without flinching. I'm not here to destroy anyone, I'm here for the truth. The words surprise even me with their clarity. This isn't about revenge, it never was. It's about setting right what was wrongfully taken. Sandra Miller sits beside me, arranging evidence folders with methodical precision. Her confidence steadies me as Judge McKinney enters and the court rises in unison. The first day proceeds according to their script. Witness after witness parades to the stand, each one painting me as unstable, incompetent, ungrateful. Former board members whose names I barely recognize describe erratic decision-making. Family friends testify to my concerning behavior with rehearsed concern. Ethan takes the stand in the afternoon, his performance almost impressive. Tears glisten in his eyes as he describes, trying to protect the family legacy from my reckless management. My brother, who never attended a budget meeting, who couldn't name 3 properties in our portfolio, suddenly portrays himself as the company's savior. My mother follows with her practiced performance of maternal concern. We only wanted what was best for Beatrice, she says, touching her throat with manicured fingers. She was never suited for leadership, despite our hopes. Graham testifies last, his voice gravely as he explains how every decision was necessary for company survival. The courtroom absorbs his words like gospel. Portland's real estate legend defending his empire against an ungrateful 6 times 2.5. Daughter. Richard smirks throughout, his confidence radiating across the aisle. By evening adjournment, whispers follow me through the courthouse corridors. Poor, deluded Beatrice, fighting her own family for nothing. I slept exactly 4 hours that night. The following morning, Sandra rises from our table. The prosecution calls Sandra Miller to the stand, not as an attorney now, but as a witness. An unusual move that causes a ripple of confusion through the gallery. Ms. Miller, please present your findings regarding Langford Holdings, LLC, Judge McKinney instructs. Sandra activates a projector displaying a meticulous timeline. What you're seeing is the documented history of Langford Holdings from 2004 through 2019. She presses a button. A recording fills the courtroom. Ethan's voice slightly muffled but unmistakable. Dad already handled that, lawyer. Then Graham's deeper tone. We just want to protect the family name. The atmosphere shifts like the weather before a storm. Richard stands to object, but Sandra is already advancing to her next exhibit. Your Honor, I present the video deposition of Althea Monroe, taken 2 weeks ago. Althea appears on screen, her 82-year-old hands trembling slightly as she recounts witnessing Henry Langford sign his original will in 2004. Ms. Diane was standing behind him the whole time, she says, watching every move like a hawk. Photographs appear next time-stamped images confirming Althea's testimony. Then financial records showing my $520,000 loan and the board meeting, minutes from my dismissal 3 months later. Judge McKinney leans forward, his interest visibly piqued. For the record, he states, this court acknowledges prior acquaintance with the decedent Henry Langford. I see no conflict of interest. Neither side raises objections. His questions become increasingly pointed as the evidence unfolds, revealing a deeper understanding of my grandfather's intentions than I'd anticipated. When Sandra calls her surprise witness Jessica Barnes, former assistant to my grandfather's missing lawyer, the family's facade begins crumbling visibly. Jessica describes documents destroyed under pressure and threats made in hushed tones. Caleb follows with recovered case notes. The technical expert demonstrates forged signatures with overlay projections that leave no room for interpretation. Banking records reveal suspicious transfers occurring days after Henry's death. Each piece builds upon the last with devastating precision. Richard's objections grow more desperate as the hours pass. By afternoon, even he seems to recognize the inevitable. Your Honor, Sandra says, we present our final exhibit, a handwritten letter from Henry Langford to his granddaughter. She reads the words I've carried in my heart. If she stands before you, she has already carried more weight than any man in this family. My mother's composure finally shatters. Her fingers grip her pearls so tightly I fear they'll snap. Graham clutches the table edge, his complexion ashen as his health visibly falters. Ethan stares at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes, not even mine. The judge reviews the evidence one final time, his expression contemplative. This case isn't complicated, he says finally. It's criminal. His verdict comes swiftly. All holdings of Langford Estates restored to me, with defendants charged with forgery and obstruction of justice. Criminal charges referred to the district attorney's office for further prosecution. As the court adjourns, I catch my mother's shocked whisper to Graham. You promised this would never happen. Outside the courtroom, Ethan blocks my path, desperation etched across his face. You've ruined everything. The accusation holds no power anymore. No, I tell him quietly, you did that yourselves. Judge's final statement addresses the elder abuse element specifically, recognizing my clear intentions and my efforts to uncover the truth. The gavel strikes with finality, its echo reverberating through the now silent room. I exhale slowly, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. There's no triumph in watching my family's disgrace, only relief that truth has finally prevailed. Sandra places her hand on my shoulder. Henry would be proud. For the first time since this began, I believe that might be true. The national news vans have finally disappeared from the courthouse steps. 3 months after the verdict, my name still appears in legal journals and whispered conversations at Portland galas I no longer attend. Graham surrendered his real estate license 2 days before a massive stroke left the right side of his body paralyzed. Diane vanished from charity boards without explanation, retreating behind the walls of a much smaller house in Lake Oswego. And Ethan Goldenboy no more now hammers nails into foundation frames in Bend, building modest homes in the very town where Langford Holdings once constructed only luxury properties. The irony isn't lost on me. I drive the familiar winding road to Crystal Lake as evening settles across the water. The same road I traveled months ago with dread coiling in my stomach now feels different, almost peaceful. The lodge sits unchanged, its weathered timbers reflecting gold in the setting sun. I park where I did that night, but this time, no headlights wait in the trees. No trap waits inside. The lake water shimmers calm and clear, carrying none of the tension that hung in the air during my last visit. I walk to the edge of the dock, my grandfather's note folded in my pocket. The paper has grown soft from my handling it over the years, those blocky letters fading but still legible. Legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. I pull out Henry's silver lighter, the one possession of his I kept all these years, and flick it open. The flame catches the corner of the note, an orange glow spreading across his handwriting. Ashes drift from my fingers, scattering across the water's surface and disappearing into ripples. They laughed when I walked in. I whispered to the darkening water, but they weren't laughing when I walked out. Last week, I met with 3 whistleblowers from Pacific Northwest Financial. The week before, 4 retirees who lost everything in an investment scheme. Yesterday, a single mother battled a predatory lender. Their stories differ, but the pattern remains the same: power, silencing, truth, money, crushing justice. In their faces, I see reflections of my own journey. Justice means nothing if it stops at the courthouse door. The Langford settlement sits mostly untouched in my account. $4.6 million feels almost vulgar after living comfortably in my loft for so long. Now I have a purpose for it. The Langford Foundation for Legal Integrity opened its doors last month. We offer free legal aid to those silenced by power. The irony of using the Langford name isn't lost on me, but perhaps that's the point. Names like legacies can be redefined. 1 year later, I stood before 28 law students at the University of Oregon. Chalk dust clings to my fingers as I write 2 sentences on the board. Integrity builds legacy. Legacy isn't given, it's built. Their eyes follow my movements. Some skeptical, others curious. They've read about my case, of course. It appears in their textbooks now, nestled between chapters on probate fraud and elder abuse. But they're here for more than legal precedent. They're drawn to the human element, the courage to stand alone against family pressure. Diane writes occasionally, her elegant stationery carrying careful words of reconciliation. Graham's recovery has left him dependent on round-the-clock nurses. Ethan's calloused hands and sunburned neck tell of slow humbling through honest work. I read their letters with compassion, but without surrender. Forgiveness doesn't require reunion. Peace exists in boundaries rather than bitterness. I pause before erasing the board, catching the sound of laughter drifting through the open window. For years, laughter was a weapon my mother's cutting sound designed to diminish. Today, the students' laughter feels life-affirming, natural, and healing. Through the window, students cross the campus green, spring sunshine streaming through budding trees. My reflection superimposes over them a bridge between generations, between what was and what could be. For the first time in years, the quiet doesn't ache, it heals. Legacy isn't inheritance but impact. The circle completes itself, from silenced daughter to empowered teacher. I catch myself smiling, not the practiced Langford smile of my youth, but something genuine. Something real, something Henry would recognize.